Now, to introduce our speaker today, Shelton Harley is a New Zealand-based researcher focusing on the global status of tuna stocks. With over 25 years of experience in international fisheries, he has participated in stock assessments for all 5 tuna RFMOs. In his last 3 years with the New Zealand government, he contributed to the design, build, and rollout of their electronic monitoring program. So Shelton will take questions at the end of the talk. Otherwise, feel free to drop them in the chat. And with that, thank you for everyone for coming, and a big thank you to our speaker for sharing your work with us today.
The title just be, should the talk be no?
Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to come here. A little bit daunting, even in this small room. I feel as though it's maybe 20 years too late for me. So I've got one equation in there. It's not very complicated, and I've probably still got it wrong. But yes, I've been working with Ray. Left the New Zealand federal government last June, and I've been working with Ray on global tuna fisheries. A lot of that time has been spent going to the different regional fisheries management organizations and participating in those assessments, but also looking at what's going on in the media, what are the big issues of the day. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Is one of those is large-scale marine protected areas. Well, there we go. So a lot of the context around the push for MPAs came out of the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, Target 3. What it really is, 30 by 30, and it's a catchphrase which is talked about by most ENGOs, and they will talk about this, that we need to protect 30% of, from land to sea. The rest of it that they don't actually talk about, which I'll just mention here for context, is that actually it's a bit more than that. And in fact, this target recognizes that sustainable use is actually consistent with 30 by 30. You don't hear that in the ENGOs. It's all about shutting up areas completely. And my sort of personal bias that I bring to MPAs is, to me, they're a bit of waving the white flag. They're saying we cannot manage our fisheries properly. We can't control them. So what we'll do is we'll just sort of lock them up. But anyway, that's my personal bias, and I'll put that now to the side. But down the bottom here is where we currently are. We're definitely well short of the target, and thus there's the big push on. So there's a couple of different fields of there, and the big push now, in particular from Lineman and some of his collaborators, is don't be afraid, they are good for fisheries. MPAs, they're good, they will help you. You will have spillover effects, your catch rates are going to go up. There's all good things. So there's a bunch of papers out there talking about that, marine reserves don't just increase abundance inside, they do it outside as well, and you're better off. Then on the other hand, you've got a bunch of researchers, including folks from here, Ray, Dan Avando, and I'm looking forward to catching up with him next week, because he's just knows this stuff inside out. But trying to, so people are looking at those other papers and just trying to dig in there and saying, well, look, you found this thing, but what does that actually mean in terms of the fishery, in terms of the stock as a whole? And so at the moment, I think there's a bit of talking past in the literature on this, but because of the 30 by 30, the things on the previous slide get published in Science and Nature, and the ones over here get published in Theoretical Ecology and things like that. So what am I going to do today? Well, I want to focus in on this paper that came out in Science in December, and it was talking about spillover benefits for global purse seine fisheries. They used publicly available through the regional organizations 1 by 1 degree data. That's they used catch per set, which is a very horrible index of abundance for purse seine fisheries, but coming up with a better one is even more harder, and so you can't criticize them for having a go and doing that. They dug into each of the different MPAs to find out, it's okay that you said it was established here, but when did you actually enforce it? When was there? And they looked at, and then they focused in on the distances from the marine protected areas. And they looked at a variety of distances. Presumably they used the ones that had the strongest effect. And they were looking at comparing CPUE 100 up to 100 nautical miles around the MPA, and how did it change compared to CPUE from 100 to 200. So, and that was my attempt at the equation up there. So they're essentially looking at the ratio or some, they're looking at how relative to each other, how does it change before and after. Their key results was that, and there is that closer to the reserve got relatively better compared to further than the reserve after you put the marine reserve in place. They looked at a range of MPAs across the globe, but in the end, there were only 6 where they actually felt that there were decent data. 3 of those are the Eastern Pacific, 2 is the Central Pacific, and 1 is in the Indian Ocean. And they found that big eye tuna benefited most from these marine protected areas and so on. So these were their key findings. So what have I done here is, well, I decided to dig in to data on 3 of these, and I'm going to very poorly pronounce them, which is going to be embarrassing. But the Nazca Desventuradas, which is off of Chile, the Galapagos, which is here, and the one which I struggle with most, which is Reiveros, I know, which is up here.
Call it E.
I know. So I focused on those 3. The reason I did is because they were all in the Eastern Pacific, and it allows me to look at the results in the context of the Eastern Pacific fisheries. And they were also 3 of the top 4. So these are the ones that worked. So their analysis essentially was just based on looking at the CPUE. And so what I've got, and I'll take a little bit of time on this. So on the left-hand side, we've got the time series of CPUE. At the top is yellowfin, and then big eye tuna for the 3 marine reserves green is 100 to 200 nautical miles, and red is 0 to 100. On the other side, I've got a box plot looking at it in a similar way. Oh, the yellow or orangey shading is after the marine protected area came into effect. So there's a few things here, and I'll just, my cursor works. So looking at yellowfin, oh no, don't do that. Yellowfin in the Galapagos, you'll see that before the marine reserve, the green bits are usually above the red, but after, the red's usually above the green. So that, and then if you look across at here, which is the same information presented a different way, you can see that the green was above before and now it's down below. Then for NASCAR, you can see a similar thing. It was very, very highly variable, but above and then now below. And then for big eye tuna down here, the green was well above. Might think it was a bit of an outlier, but now they're very similar down below. So those are essentially the confirmation of the patterns that came through in their analysis. They did a series of GLMs. They took into account flag and square, and then they did some stuff looking at ENSO and things like that. But essentially from the data, these are the strongest patterns that confirm what they're talking about. So there's a bunch of other stuff that you see in these graphs, like there's some quite strong trends in catch rates over time before and after. You can see that there's, as I said, with NASCAR, very, very highly uncertain data, and there's very little effort there as well. But yeah, we have, as far as I'm concerned, I looked at this and so did Dan Avando, and we're going, based on their analysis, the patterns, we can see the patterns that they saw, job done. The answer is yes, maybe. So, well, are we done or is there more? And so they looked at CQE. The first, and what they did, which was really awesome, the GitHub repository for their code, with one very small exception, was brilliant. I could step through, pull the data sets together and do those, follow what they had done. But the first thing they did was that they got rid of any data from the area where the MPA was actually established. So because that didn't matter, all they were looking at is the areas outside of the MPA. So we've got information on catches, we've got information on what's actually happened in those areas before that they were established, and maybe some context about how big these areas are in terms of the overall fishery. And so just one of the things we've got, so just the plot there is catches around each of the MPAs. They have different scales, but you could see NASCAR is very, very small catches. And the red catches are catches that were within the marine protected area, but essentially before it was established. So for NASCAR, there was never any fishing in that reserve. For the Galapagos, very little and a little bit in E.
Ray, that's a Ray helpful. B as
I know, I'm tired. I didn't use the first 20 minutes. But, right, so where are we? Okay. So how important were each of these areas before the closure came into effect? So the top is catch, the bottom is effort, before and after. And I'm just gonna, and I keep including their key result there for, just for context, because I think it's important. Remember, NASCAR is has the strongest spillover effect of any MPA on tuna, and yeah. So before the MPA was put into effect, no fishing inside it and very little fishing within 100 nautical miles of it. For the Galapagos, a little bit inside it, and a reasonable amount of fishing within 100 and 200 nautical miles. So you can, the key thing for interested me here is that these were not areas of high catches that we were. Now, what happened afterwards? So a lot of the talk about spillover is that once you put the MPA in place, everybody comes and fishes on the edge, and that's how you get your benefits. We've already seen that there is CPUE benefits for some species and some MPAs. What you see here, so the top is before, the bottom is after. Ignore the little bits of red which suggests there was still fishing within after. Who knows? But let's not be fixated on those. But what you see here is for each of these MPAs, there's a lot more fishing near than there was before. And it's not just the transfer of the effort from inside. So there is, you look at this and you would say there is evidence that they are fishing more close to the edge of the reserve than they used to before. So that, again, is typically what you're looking for your good things that a marine reserve could do. So now just trying to put these areas into context. So each of, now along the bottom is, so that's proportion. So essentially 1% of the area of the Eastern Pacific where there's purse seining is now covered by these those 3 marine protected areas. And those from the paper, that 1% is providing a 12% uptick to this other 5% of areas, too many percentages, sorry. But it's essentially the majority of the fishery is a long way away from these areas. So what's happened to the catch since we now looking across all of those MPAs? What's happened to catch? So before, 1% of the catch occurred within those areas, and 11% of the catch was within 200 nautical miles of those areas. We have seen that those areas have become more important since those MPAs were put in place. Now 19% of catch is taken within 200 nautical miles of these areas. Run out of notes, I think. So I'm just going to go back to the paper again. So they found a 12 to 18% spillover effect on CPUE. The greatest benefits with the big eye tuna, and the greatest spillover was from, I'm just going to say NASCAR and keep it simple. In this paper, they even went much further. They took a step because they were able to actually, and these are for a couple of other MPAs that we don't have here, they're actually able to work out who are the fishing nations that are benefiting from these marine protected areas as well. So it's not just that there's very clear benefits to fisheries, but we actually know who's getting them. Yeah. So where have I got to? So yes, there is some evidence that CPUE has got relatively better for some species and some MPAs. And there is evidence of relatively more effort near MPAs, more than just redistribution. The areas close to these MPAs have become more important to the fishery. But the most effective MPA had little or no historical catch and has very low actual catch. There's a few dozen fishing events a year, a few thousand tons. But just to note, remember their analysis just looked at this effect, which was the change in CPUE. It didn't care about the magnitude of the CPUE or how important it was. Now, these MPAs cover 1% of the purse seine fishery. So how appropriate is it to extrapolate these benefits of 1% of MPAs to something larger? And these near zones are also mostly within EEZs of countries. They're not actually on the high seas. So what I've got to keep doing, because we all know it takes much longer to dig into and try and tease these things apart than it did to do them in the first place, is I need to go in and have a look at I was younger then. But I had to have a tuna photo, seeing I had a salmon one at the start.
Didn't notice.
Vessel nationalities near versus far, because the near is still within EEZs, the far will be on the high seas. They did standardize for flags, but I'm a bit nervous that it might be unbalanced. And catch per set is generally something that is controlled by the size of the vessel. So the data set which they used does have nationality, and I want to compare the fleet composition before and after near and far to see what's going on there. Also, there's been a huge change in the purse seine fishery over time through different modes of fishing. If you're not familiar, in the Eastern Pacific, there's generally 3 types of purse seine fishing. They fishing for yellowfin tuna when they're associated with porpoise, fishing on just free, we call unassociated schools, usually of yellowfin or skipjack that you just find on the surface, and then those that you catch using floating objects that could be man-made, but more often these days are artificial. You set them and then you follow them, and then you essentially fish them when there's enough fish there. So I want to make sure that could have an impact on the before versus after. And I haven't got the map there, but the 3 MPAs are all very close to the coast. Relatively speaking, compared to the majority of the fishery. So for me, there's the far part is further away than the near part. So I want to have a look to see, is there a fuel effect? Is there something that might be just more generally resulting in vessels fishing closer to port than away? And then let's see when we go even further away, because the effect doesn't travel very far. 100 nautical miles in a very big ocean isn't a particularly wide ranging effect. And then the bit which I hoping to get some insights today is, yeah, how do you, and Dan has obviously done a lot of the stuff, what needs to be true in order to see the effects that we're seeing there? You know, a 10-15% increase in CPUE, but only for this bit, it's gone by here. What needs to be true for that to happen? And I think the really big question is what needs to be true for these findings to be scalable for instances where you've got 3 small MPAs that cover 1% of the fishery, but we're talking about expanding that to 30%. So that is all I have. Now I can take questions.
I think Ray had one comment, but otherwise, yeah, if anyone in the room has questions.
Let Ray express himself.
I think he was saying interesting that in the Medoff and Linham papers, they use the difference between before and after rather than the ratio. I think he's referring to,
Yeah, well, I guess, Ray, do you think that they might be trying to take into account some of the comments that were made about their work? Because it certainly seems more sensible to be looking at the changes in ratios, but when you look back at the CPUE, there's just some very strong trends occurring in there, which in themselves are interesting, and that would, you certainly, if they used the approach they'd used for the long line analysis, they probably would have got completely different results.
Well, I guess that's my big, I mean, does any tuna assessment use per seine CPUE for anything other than, hey, there's some dead fish here? I mean, everyone I've ever looked at, the first thing you do is you say, we estimate effort devs for the per seine fisheries, because no one uses per seine CPUE for anything. I mean, it's just ludicrous. I mean, in fact, you know, where the other, and you could look at this, I don't know about tuna fisheries, but for small pelagics, the thing that matters is not the catch rate, it's the time to the searching time. And the more effort you have, the lower the searching time. So, you know, and I mean, the other thing about just declaring an MPA increases spillover, I love that. I think that's, you don't have to, I mean, if you do a proper analysis, the NASCA stuff has to be a reference, because you had an increase without an effect. The control, you know, so in a standard experimental design, there's a control effect here. So this is just crazy. You've got an effect without a treatment. That's not science. I mean, tell me how that what you're saying is, if I think about an MPA, I will have spillover. That's what that result says, and it's the most significant. That's crazy.
So yeah, a couple of.
I'm sure Ray has expressed.
Well, I'll come to that one, because that's the one that's really troubled me the most. The first one, yeah, nobody would use catch per set. When per seine CPUE is used, they try and take into account search time, but that type of analysis doesn't lend itself to getting abundances of CPUE in these small bands
No, it
around.
doesn't matter. If you're using the wrong data, you're gonna get the wrong answer.
But I am, but the second point, and I believe the NASCAR one is just a complete artifact of very poor data and possibly some fleet movements. But in general, though, if you had an area which nobody fished, but then they started fishing, you established this protected area, but people started fishing more heavily around it, you still could get this gradient, I think. And this is the...
Yeah, well, if effort dynamics are a function of effort, which we do know for some of the small pelagic fisheries, you know, the more effort you have, the more people are gonna, if they're communicating, you're gonna find fish, and that's what you wanna do, right? With a purse seine, I mean, you know, using long line makes much more sense if there was long line data.
But I'm thinking, and this is the modeling bit, if you've got an area that's never been fished and the fish is slowly spreading, and then you stop that, but you're fishing more heavily now around that area, I still think you could get a spillover effect like they do. If you're fishing, but certain things would have to be true.
You have to do some conspiracy theory level.
That was my question is why? I mean, you showed that there is an increase in effort near the MPA after the MPA went in. Do you know why did some of these fishers feel like, oh, they put in an MPA, we must have better catch rates near there? Do you know why that occurred?
And so,
Or is there some movement of the fish?
yeah, so I've just got so those are the three there. So relatively speaking, and this is the extent of the fishery. So relatively speaking, they are closer to port. The currents, and Jim can correct me, most of the movement is offshore as well. So I don't, that's why I want to have a look, because the near zones are all still within the EEZ of those countries. And so it'll be interesting to see, because that comes down to licensing agreements. So that's why I'm just a little cautious that there might be only certain, it might be that only certain nationalities were actually able to get access to that area. And in which case, if you're there and others can't, then that's a competitive advantage that you have over another nation. So that's why I wonder if that could be driving, that's the increase in fishing the edge, is just you have, because there's no access arrangements for
But you
the
have
high
access
seas.
before.
Not, well, sorry, certain flags have had access, and
But-
that can change, but yeah.
I mean,
I,
and the basic thing is, I'm looking at biologists, I mean, if this was abalone, no problem. I actually believe in spillover of abalone outside MPAs because they don't move, but their progeny do. What's the mechanism that, I mean, yellowfin are moving all over the place, right? What is spillover in the case of this thing? I mean, this is not abalone.
Well, I mean, I've been to the Villa Hijeros
Oh, very good.
and,
How many times are you gonna say that?
it's a really hard one to say. I wasn't keen, but it isn't, I mean, it's a place where fishermen go all the time, and I personally think there's schools of fish that are associated with there, that will stay there. They're not like other schools, just like there's schools that swim with fish aggregating devices and, you know, open schools and with dolphins, and so, you know, I think there's a range, so there could be cases where, specifically for that case in Mexico, where you could get a benefit because those fish hang out there and they're big yellowfin, or yellowfin, big items, yeah. But those fish there's big fish there, and the fishermen.
That's at the end of the Gulf of Mexico. Is that where that is roughly?
With California current.
It's way off the end of Baja.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I have it.
100 miles out.
You went diving.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. It's really cool.
Were you in the MPA? Were you scaring the fish out of the MPA? You are the cause of spillover.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah,
I mean, to me, you know, the dynamics, and this is where you got to build a model, but the dynamics should say that if you're generating spillover, you should see trends over time. I'm not seeing anything vaguely that looks like the kind of sort of traditional spillover.
yeah, that's it. I mean, the trends in CQE and that are going on there is, it's hard to know where were we? It's hard to know what's going on for yellowfin tuna. Yet this is what this pattern here is essentially what got the Galapagos up to second on the most effective MPA. Yet what you had was essentially just a big decrease in CPUE further away from it wasn't an increase nearby, it was a decrease further away.
Or it's a decrease for everything.
Yes, sorry, it is certainly a decrease, but it's,
It's
certainly
more
more
clear.
for the away,
It's more for
Yeah.
the green than for the red.
yeah,
But
sorry, Jim.
Having not read the paper, do they talk in it about problems with preferential sampling? Talking,
yeah, that's,
I mean,
With preferential sampling of,
it's just, you know, if you really wanted to test the effect of it, you would have a dedicated boat that fished over time inside and out and, you know, and that kind of thing. I guess it relates more to and you said they didn't have a vessel effect because.
no, they had a flag. Vessel, they had so they found that the size of the spillover effect was greatly reduced when they sought to standardize
that's not good.
the result. Yeah, I'm interested in how balanced the standardization was, but you know, one of the general challenges with these types of papers is you can think of things about the analysis that you don't like, but trying to figure out how you would do it is much more complicated.
There are times when you just have to say, these are the wrong data for this problem.
Also, we said we'd let Ray talk, and now Ray's raising his hand. because
Oh,
we didn't
great,
let him
yeah.
talk.
I'm sorry,
I'm-
apologies.
I'm
being-
conveying.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah,
We can
go
hear
for
you.
it.
Okay. But something that we haven't talked about before that you raised, interesting is the flag makes a difference. You don't have vessel size, right? You just have flag?
No,
One by one.
and that's definitely would have changed over time.
Yeah, but you would also think that the vessel size on average close to the inside the economic zone would be smaller than outside. But that wouldn't explain why something might have changed, but maybe the vessels that are fishing in the outside EEZs have gotten bigger over time, whereas the vessels that are fishing inside the EEZs have changed left. So if Dan probably has data on vessel size, I would assume.
Yeah, well, even just Ray, looking at the flag contributions before and after, near and far. I mean, you could just have something where beforehand they had 5 flags that they had licensed to fish in their EZ, and then afterwards is some sort of agreement for putting the thing in place that maybe only 1 flag has access to that now. But that's conjecture until I have a look and find it in the data. But I worry that could be driving some of this.
Well, you're taking the ratios now.
That's essentially what they were doing, but
The
if it's,
ratio should scale out some of those things.
unless you've got
Unless you're-
different boats inside and out before and after, that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, well, near and far.
Near and far, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
legion,
a lot of your plot, the effort plots are proportion of effort, right? And I'm curious about whether you have those in absolute, like actually how many sets were.
Yeah,
in that
yes.
period. And I think that would be a compelling story to hear about too.
yeah, I
rather
mean,
than just-
yeah, and you can see it here that, I mean, just the nature of the data, and I'll find that, and I'll move to the catch one. That there is, the 2 on the left, there is really good time series of catch and effort for those. For the Galapagos, it was essentially enforced in, I think, 2002. So it's a really good data set to be able to dig into. All of the others, and sorry, I'm just gonna jump back. A lot of these other MPAs have only been established relatively recently, and the data set, I was gonna say it went through to 2023, but it might not have been that far. It might be shorter than that. So there's not a large amount of data for many of these since the MPA was put in.
But yet it's significant. In some cases.
Well, sorry.
You mean that NASCA thing
Yeah.
has got like 4 data points or whatever it is, and it's significant.
Yeah.
That is so problematical from an experimental design point of view. You know, you shouldn't see that. Because it's a control. I mean, the whole point of control is it should be a big blob on the 0 line. Because you're essentially saying just because we declared it, it created CPUE. Which says to me that that is the control, not the other one. I mean, that is a control, right? I mean, I don't believe the data set, but it is a control. So you're saying the control has an effect. That's
The biggest.
yeah, that's not a thing. You fail experimental design 101 when your control has a bigger effect than your treatment. Much.
I was wondering if you have had a look at the other case, like the one which are closer to 0 or even negative. Like, if you have like, which are kind of trying to like disaggregate data to understand what's leading to the effect we can see. And I was wondering if looking at the other response can kind of in detail can help.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, Jarvis, which is a US position, that one's going to be very interesting because, and I haven't included it here, but it had, I thought there was quite, trying to recall, I think there was a reasonable amount of catch in the area before it was closed. Yes, it doesn't, but just for this one, I focused in on the Eastern Pacific, but if you were to expand it, you would probably do the whole Pacific. But interestingly, if you go to the whole Pacific, there are some areas that they didn't consider, like French Polynesia, they don't allow any purse seining, and parts of their EEZ would be considered, you know, potentially purse seine fishable. And then you've got high seas pockets, so gaps between EEZs in the Western Pacific, which have been closed as well. But because they're relatively small, you can't, the 1 degree square data doesn't really allow that. But I think extending it to have a look across the Pacific and bring in Jarvis and Pippa is a good idea.
I think you have one more question online. Yeah, you can go ahead and unmute, John.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hi everybody. Hi Shelton. Enjoyed hearing that. One thing that recent paper didn't mention was anything about FADs, I don't think. So even when you have these areas that are closed, you still have FADs drifting through them and having whatever impacts they do on distributing tunas. In fact, I did see a paper recently that used the acoustic biomass estimates from drifting FADs to look at before and after presumed biomass inside the MPA itself, which is an interesting way to look at it because you can't obviously get that information from fishing data. Do you think there's much potential to do that in the EPO and maybe the Western Central Pacific as well?
Yeah, thanks, John, and great I'm glad I didn't know you were on the call until now. I would have been, yes, even more nervous than I am. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think there is something in the fad, drifting fad aspect to this, even with log sets, which is something that I, hope to get into. But also I think, and I don't know if Dan Evando's on the call, but Ray and I were chatting with him a couple of weeks ago, and I think he's doing some collaborations with some European scientists, possibly ASTI, and they have access to that acoustic buoy data. And I think you could absolutely answer those questions with that. Looking at how at least the perceived abundance changes.
Or you want to replace your CPUE by the acoustic biomass, basically, because
Yeah.
that actually is an index.
Because part of the, now just going dead into it, John, is that one of the potential biases or drivers here is if the fad has got a lot of fish on it, you will fish it. And if it doesn't, you might leave it in the water for longer. So there's, and also just because it's your fad, it doesn't mean that you're the only one who'll necessarily get to fish it. They do try to hide them better than they were back in the day, but people can still find other people's fads.
I'm just, Ray, it looks like you have something to say, but I've left both of you unmuted, so.
Okay, yeah, this is something that Shelton and Dan, who know these fisheries a lot better than I do, brought up, is that imagine that before the establishment, that you've got fads drifting through the area and being fished, but after the fishery is closed, they drift through the area and are unfished. So when they reach the first 100 nautical miles, they've got quite a bit higher density of fish underneath them, and they then get fished there. And so you're getting this high CPUE not because there's more fish there, but the fads have been unfished for the time that they are inside the closed area. And they're more likely to be fished and depleted a bit in the first 100 nautical miles than by the time they get to the second 100 nautical miles, there's a good chance they would have been fished. So that's, and I think it was either Dan or Shelton was saying, if you look at Galapagos, that apparently the system is they drop their fads on the southerly side of the reserve, and they fish them after they've drifted through on a northerly current. So you really do need to know how these fisheries work.
So is the data separated by fishing type? Because under Ray's hypothesis, fad, CPUE should show an effect, and the other types shouldn't. I can't remember one by one is at the level. Yeah.
John might know better. I don't think set type was in the data that they use, but I could check that. It's a question as to whether a breakdown by flag and set type and 1 degree square is public domain or not. And I just don't know off the top of my head. John might know.
I was going to ask, is there any other more confidential level data that you guys could get hold of? I mean, for example, is there purse seining in area J? Because that would almost certainly be the Australian coral reef, the coral sea fishery, right? And given the sensitivity of the issue, you might be able to get access to some of that more detail, if that's purse seining.
Yeah, no, so
That's long line?
well, no, they, in
J.
they went and found every MPA they could and then slowly whittled them down. And originally, the original big long list had the Ross Sea.
Well,
Exactly. So,
but J is an area where the coral sea
yeah,
fishery operates. So, and there may be more raw data available than you get from Ecuador or wherever.
one thing that was interesting, because longline data is only made public available at a 5 by 5 degree square. So they did a little bit of that, but perhaps like in the supplementary information, but you couldn't really
So
do
what
that.
I'm
So-
saying is contacting with the data owners and saying, hey, you want to solve this problem? We'll help you look at your data. You won't be able to put it as data available in a science paper, but you'll never get in science anyway.
Yeah, we already know that, as several critiques were submitted and all rejected already.
Oh, because your answer's wrong, right?
Well, no, actually, it turns out that science no longer accepts technical comments. The only form of critique is a very short letter to the editor.
And even that
Or-
gets rejected.
Yeah, and those get rejected. But I think one of the things Lynham would say is, well, yeah, a CPUE may not be a great index of abundance, but that's what matters to the fishermen. Except it's not catch per set, it's catch per day. And that would require a different analysis than what they have, if I understand the data correctly.
Hi, am I still on
Yeah,
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 loudspeaker? Yeah, just on the issue, Andre, you raised it about, you know, this sort of nonsensical result where you have areas closed that previously had none or very little catch, producing an apparently positive effect. There's obviously a lot of kind of coincidental observation in this, and I thought Dan Ovando, when we were discussing that paper, recent paper, had a very good idea in saying, what if you chose randomly areas of about that size from throughout the fishery and sort of assumed that they were closed when in fact they weren't, and subjected them to the same analysis? What proportion of false positives would you get? I always thought that would be a very interesting thing to do.
he's done it.
Oh, and what did he find?
Well, no, I think his conclusion was that we were down, it wasn't random. Those are, you didn't, it didn't, it didn't come out. Yeah, but I've got the results somewhere, John, but yeah, he did do that. Very clever.
Anyway, and in terms of further analysis, Shelton, by all means, come out to our side of the Pacific. I think there's quite a few opportunities to do some interesting stuff. We obviously have access to all the data, and I always thought High Seas Pocket number 2, if you can cast your mind back and remember what that is, it's been effectively closed, although not an MPA, but it's been effectively closed since 2010. And there's you know, very fine scale data from purse seine and indeed longline all around that area. So that would be a nice opportunity.
I guess the other question which I was going to raise was how close are these closed areas? For example, the one in the middle of the Indian Ocean, based on what I know about Indian Ocean compliance, is the one that's called Chagos, I guess. You know, to what extent are these areas actually enforced? So in other words, again, what's the, that's not significant clearly, but, you know, these MPAs, how confident are you that they're actually MPAs?
I mean, that was something that they really dug into in their analysis. They did say that they were at pains to do that. And I think Chagos is now actually maybe removed from the list of MPAs. There's a bunch of politics around that between the British and I think the US and then the people who I think were living there at the time. So but yeah, they did give that a good go, and you'd like to think. I mean, obviously now with tools like Global Fishing Watch, you should be able to do that quite easily for these vessels, because you can quite easily tell the difference between steaming, transiting, and fishing.
Question, not that anybody ever believes the assessment results, but do they actually bring in trends from assessments? I mean, we're talking temporal changes, like, could be overall abundance related, considering.
Yeah, if you go back to those slides, those trains are so different, especially.
Yeah, it's hard to, I mean, it's hard to think that our assessments would give any insights into the 100 to 200 nautical mile.
But as a
Thing,
background,
but yeah,
The Galapagos CPE is very depressing if it's true. Can you go back to that slide? There was, the one trend that was really interesting was the things like the Big Eye Galapagos. If you look at that, you would say that the FAR has essentially collapsed. I mean, those trends are not, I don't know what the model assumed for temporal patterns, but they're not random. None of these are. You can't treat these as independent data points. Just don't look at them.
No, I mean, we're almost at time, but if anyone has a final question or comment, then. All right,
scale. 100% scale.
So maybe we have a repeat performance in 6 months, Shelton?
Yeah, you'll know the answer.
well. Yes, boss.
just hand your email over to the next group, so they'll know to come and get you. All right, well, let's thank our speaker again. With that, that is the final quant seminar of this quarter, so we will see you again in April. Thank you,
And
everyone.
thanks to the organizers for a wonderful series. Have we got a full series already? You guys are.
We do, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
fantastic.
so we'll send out the email, I guess, first week of next quarter, so, yeah.
Whatever that is.
2 weeks.
Will we be in, will you be here?
Yeah.
In 2 weeks, I'll be in Friday Harbor?
After Friday Harbor, it's the Monday after.
Oh.
Friday Harbor is spring break, technically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we?
Sorry, what's a break?